Sophie was an orphan growing up in an orphanage. That night, she was hiding under a blanket, reading a book. A noise outside her window disturbed her. She went out to the balcony to check it out, but was surprised to see a giant. At the same time, the giant saw her too. Sophie thought it was a hallucination. She hid under the covers in fear. The giant was afraid that she would tell the secret of the giant. He took Sophie and led her through the streets. He kept disguising himself to avoid detection. After a long journey back to his house, he hung Sophie on a branch and went to prepare dinner. Sophie saw the window next to her. She tried to escape through it, but she failed. The giant grabbed her again. She was terrified of being eaten by the giant. Fortunately, the giant doesn't eat people, but he warned Sophie not to leave this place because if the other giants find her, she would be eaten by the other giants. To prevent her from escaping again, the giant put Sophie in the ship's observation deck. After more conversations, Sophie came to realize that the giant was very friendly. She listened to the giant read a storybook and slowly fell asleep. The giant saw that she was already asleep. He went to his workshop. In his workshop, there were balls with all kinds of dreams. It made a red nightmare. Sophie woke up to find the giant sleeping. She jumped out of the window without incident, but she didn't get very far before another giant grabbed her. She asked the friendly giant for help. The friendly giant saw that she had been captured. He went back inside and closed the door. Sophie was eaten by the giant. Sophie woke up from a nightmare. It turns out the friendly giant gave her the nightmare to get her to give up the idea of running away. He took out a bottle of green soda. It's not like a regular soda. The bubbles of the soda fell downward. He drank the soda with gusto, and then he let out a giant green fart. At that moment, an even bigger giant broke into his house. This giant's finger was hurt. He asked the friendly giant to bandage it. Sophie was afraid he'd find her. She kept looking for a place to hide. While the giant was bandaging the wound, she hid in a cucumber. When the giant was done, his greed took the cucumber from the table. The friendly giant didn't know Sophie was inside the cucumber. Just as the giant was about to eat the cucumber, the friendly giant saw Sophie hiding in the cucumber. He stopped the giant and reminded the giant that it was the cucumber you hate. The giant was terrified of the cucumber. He threw the cucumber to the ground and tried to crush it, but the friendly giant stopped him just in time. The giant took the green soda from the table and left. The friendly giant picked up the cucumber and placed it on the table. Sophie crawled out of the cucumber. She was in a terrible state. The cucumber was all over her. The friendly giant took Sophie to his workshop and rinsed her off with water. Then he brought out some clothes for her to change into. Sophie chose a red jacket. When the friendly giant saw Sophie in this jacket, it seemed to bring back some sad memories. He put Sophie in a small room, and then he was ready to go out to work. Sophie wanted to go with him. The friendly giant refused because he was afraid Sophie would be discovered by the other giants. He didn't want to put her in danger. After Sophie begged and pleaded with him, he took Sophie with him. They had to pass by a place where the giants were resting. Sophie was hidden in a handbag. The friendly giant passed carefully. Just as he was about to pass through, a giant grabbed him by the foot. He fell to the ground. The noise woke the other giants. Sophie rushed out of here. He hid in a pickup truck. The waking giants began to tease the friendly giant. They threw him around like a toy. Then they grabbed the truck off the ground. They took the truck and the friendly giant up the hill. He was forced to sit in the truck. They made him collide with another giant. The giant had the cars under his feet. They were both sliding in each other's direction at the same time. Luckily, Sophie and the car changed the direction of the truck. The giant's legs were spread apart, leaving the giant with a fatal blow. The other giants cheered the friendly giant's victory. At that moment, it started raining heavily. They were terrified of getting wet. They quickly took refuge in the rain. The friendly giant told Sophie to hide in her handbag and quickly left that area. The giants found the blanket Sophie had left behind. They smelled the human child on the blanket. By now, the friendly giant and Sophie were heading for the hills. They passed through the clouds and came to a huge tree. The friendly giant jumped into the lake, and then he told Sophie to jump in too. They entered another world. This is where dreams begin. There are all kinds of dreams here. They all glowed with different colors. A gold-colored dream floats in the air. It's very rare. Sophie commanded the friendly giant to help him catch this wonderful dream. The dream seemed to like Sophie very much. It flew to Sophie. The friendly giant grabbed it when it wasn't looking and put it in a glass bottle. Sophie greeted it politely. It drew a portrait of Sophie in the bottle. This was a great surprise to Sophie. She looked at the other dreams floating in the air and wanted to catch them. She ran after them. Suddenly, a red dream appeared. Sophie chased after it and caught it. The friendly giant realized that Sophie had caught the red dream. He told Sophie to give it to him, and told Sophie that only nightmares are red. The friendly giant put the dream in a glass bottle, then disappeared into the fog. Sophie called out to him with great nervousness. The giant pulled Sophie out of the lake, then took her away from the place. Sophie said she would call him Big Friendly Giant. BFG. Big Friendly Giant seemed very happy and accepted it. Curious, Sophie asked him where he was going next. The giant said he was going to blow the dream away. He took Sophie back to the city. They came to a little boy's bedroom window. The BFG mounted the dream on an instrument that looked like a trumpet and blew the dream into the boy's bedroom. The boy had a very happy dream. In the dream, the president himself called him. His father was so surprised he fainted. The dream made him feel very proud. After finishing the work, the BFG took Sophie home. On the way, they saw a giant owl foraging for food. They were very careful to keep out of sight of the giants. Sophie was feeling a bit cold, but she couldn't find her blanket. The BFG couldn't find it either. Then they realized they might have lost it in the country of the giants. This made the BFG feel very uneasy. Sophie woke up outside the orphanage. She thought it was a nightmare of being abandoned by the BFG. She calls out to the BFG. Then the BFG appeared and told her because her blanket was left behind in the land of the giants. The giants must have found out about her. It's not safe there anymore. Then the BFG told her that a boy once saw him too. He took the boy back to the land of the giants. But the boy was eaten. The boy was wearing the red jacket. For Sophie's safety, the BFG sent Sophie back to the orphanage. When Sophie returned to the orphanage, she seemed to sense that the BFG had left. She went to the balcony and climbed over the fence. Then she firmly jumped off. Luckily, the BFG caught her. The BFG was touched by Sophie and took her back to the land of the giants again. On the way home, a giant is monitoring his movements. When they got home, Sophie was thinking of some plans. Then the giant broke into the BFG's house again, and with other giants in tow, they told BFG to hand over the child. BFG was furious and told them to leave the house, but they ignored the BFG and started searching for the child. Their behavior made a mess of the place. They destroyed the BFG's workshop. Sophie hid and hid until she entered a small room. This is the room where the boy used to live. Enraged, the BFG chased the giants away with a torch. The giants were scared away by him. Sophie saw the queen's portrait in the room. She suddenly had a plan. The workshop was in shambles. She told the BFG about it. The plan required the queen's help. The BFG followed her plan. They made a nightmare, and they were going to blow it to the queen to let the queen know of the giant's existence and danger. The queen woke up from a nightmare. She told her assistant about her nightmare. The assistant read the newspaper and was surprised to find the queen's dream was exactly the same as the missing child case on the news. After reading the news, the queen remembered the hints in her dream. She asked her assistant to open the curtains. Sophie was waiting for the queen. The queen knew why they were there. She decided to help them. She summoned the army and hosted a banquet for the BFG and Sophie. The BFG cautiously pushed their way into the palace. As he rose in the hall, he accidentally broke an old chandelier. The queen didn't blame him. She had her servants prepare a huge table and chairs for him. It was the best meal the BFG had ever had. Unfortunately, the coffee wasn't to his liking. He took the green soda out of his bag and shared it with everyone. Everyone who drank the green soda let out a giant green fart. It was embarrassing, but the queen seemed very happy. She gave the order to leave for the land of giants. According to the plan, they were to blow nightmares on the sleeping giants and make them defenseless, but the BFG stools were left behind in the palace. Sophie rushed into the crowd of giants with a glass vial in her arms, and when she opened it, the giants noticed her. She quickly lifted the bottle and broke it. Nightmares flew at the giants. They all had nightmares. Nightmares of bad things they'd done. It made them feel guilty and sad. Only one of the giants caught the nightmare and crushed it. The giant tried to grab Sophie. The BFG stopped him and let Sophie escape, but the BFG was caught by the giant. Just as the giant was about to punch the BFG, the giant's arm got tangled. The queen's army got here just in time. They captured the giant. Then they transported the giant by helicopter to a deserted island. They left the giant with a cucumber and a chest. The giant opened the chest and found it full of cucumber seeds. At the end of the story, the queen adopted Sophie. Sophie says good morning to the BFG every morning, even though they were very far apart. But the BFG could hear Sophie's voice because he had very big ears.